Hi, my name's Anusha Bradley. I'm so pleased to host this panel of former Jehovah's Witnesses who have all really in their different forms turned their grief, loss and trauma of once belonging to this religion into activism and art. We have Shane Meechan, Lara Kaput and Scott Homan. And Scott, your documentary Witness Underground, the central theme to that is around shunning. Is that what sort of sparked your decision to make the documentary?
Yes, the theme of the movie is shunning, and that's the one thing that I feel is universal to everyone who leaves the religion, is that you get shunned. Whether you get kicked out or you leave on purpose or you fade away, at some point you're cut off from your community. And I was sort of shocked that that happened to me.
Lara?
My concern is that illegal things are happening at lower levels and at the top and everywhere in between, and that governments aren't taking action. And the way that I am trying to alleviate that is making governments around the world aware of all the criminality or unlawful behaviour that's happening.
Shane?
Growing up as a JW, I was always set as a goal to be an elder. And I truly believed as an elder you're there to, and sometimes I succeed and other times I fail, but to be a support, to be encouraging, to listen to them. When I got out of the JWs and went into the ex-JWs, I realised there's more of a need. And so I started to work. When I'd hear there was an ex-JW, I'd reach out to them, say, are you okay? Do you need help? And throughout New Zealand, we started to set up meet-up groups so that we could meet and do things. And all these other things, they're important. But to get out of the JWs, so hard, like all the similar things we've heard with the other institutions. We've got to give support. We've got to be there. They've got to have somebody to listen. And to me, that's one of the main concerns that I like.
Can you expand on why it is so hard to leave? There may be people in the audience who don't know about the shunning process, for example.
Well, to use what I personally know is you decide to leave or you've done something wrong, grandparents, aunties, uncles, brothers, sisters, all gone. And they're sitting there and they're going, what am I going to do? They are lost. My daughter, my own daughter, stood in my office and went, boom! It's all gone. My support system's gone. And she had me, but the ones that she'd spent so much time, because she left after, well, she actually left twice. But yeah, it was such a big issue, and I found so many others, even here today, some who didn't know there's an ex-JW community who's ready to support, to be there unconditionally without judgment.
I'd just be interested to know if each of you could share what prompted you to leave and at what age did this happen? In a sentence or two. I know it will be complex. Yeah.
Oh, it's a really long path, and there's a lot of nuance to it. For maybe someone on the outside, it'd be like you're in or you're out, but I feel like it's like a 7-year process going from physically in, mentally in, to physically out, mentally in, to maybe going back to it, and then finally being physically out and mentally out, but then beginning the process of deconstructing that. And for me, I left at 19, and then went back to it on terms with my dad, and then finally left it in 2008 when I was 27. And yeah, the shocking thing was like, I found out that their entire belief system is like based on really poor foundations. And the film actually discusses like Noah's Ark, which sounds maybe silly to everyone because it's like an allegory. But like finding out that like it's all made up, it's all fiction, mythology, and like you have to believe everything they teach.
Lara?
I was also 19, but totally different. I just left. And the reason why I just left is, and some people have mentioned it earlier, but the way that religions treat women in general, and the Jehovah's Witnesses were just so misogynist. So that was the one of two factors. And the second thing was, I didn't want to live in paradise on earth forever with Jehovah's Witnesses. They were just so hypocritical. And I just, that just wasn't a bonus for me. Yeah.
Shane?
I didn't have that experience. I left when I was 42, but I didn't really leave. it took another 7 years for me to go, and ask a question. And one of the first things that I heard, I'm going, what? And that was an elder could stay an elder if years before he had done something wrong, which normal J-dubs would get kicked out for, if it appeared that he had God's Holy Spirit. You know, in other words, doing meeting parts or assembly parts or other assignments in the J-dubs. And I'm going, no. And then it was the Australian Royal Commission. And so it was a number of things. I'm going, I don't believe this. I would walk out to the lounge and I would say to the one in the lounge, you won't believe this. And it must have been 20, 30 times that I did that. I just could not believe what I was part of.
I've heard many people describe to me, many former Jehovah's Witnesses that I've interviewed, that Australian Royal Commission was a real turning point for them when the evidence came out. So was that a big factor for you?
No. I didn't even know it was happening. And then I stumbled over and I go, what? No, I know the policies. I didn't know the policies, so even though I was an elder, I had never dealt with child abuse. I didn't even know they had a problem. And it wasn't until I allowed myself to ask a simple question, I'm going, what have I been part of?
So you all share similar concerns, but you use vastly different ways to raise awareness and create change. Can you maybe each describe why you have chosen the form of activism that you have? Scott.
Filmmaking. Okay. So I started out doing a YouTube channel interviewing ex-members in a sort of documentary style. Like what happens after you have complete freedom, and then but you came from this bizarre background, transformative moment. I found that there was a hole not being served, basically. And I wanted to make something that was like celebrating someone that got out. The best part of life started there. And then everything became awesome after that. Like, let's show that. What is that thing? And I don't know if it worked. I'm still waiting to find out. Like, you're the target audience, so I need you to do a review on Rotten Tomatoes and share it with all your friends and tell the world.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Scott. It must take a huge personal toll or cost. Lara, you have a completely different approach.
I'm not a creative.
No, I would say you're like almost like academic. You like just go for it with government submissions. Talk about your approach.
Yeah, so, well, I was really lucky because I left quite young. My dad was a scientist and I was able to get an education. So a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses haven't been to uni, for example. I went to 3. And so I had my degree. A lot of them also are in a poverty situation. So some ladies might be single mothers. They are supposed to get married quite young and have children to the cults. And I avoided that. So in some ways I was in a really good situation. Because I'd left at 20, I knew nothing about the Jehovah's Witnesses for 25 years after that, until the Royal Commission. I saw it advertised in the paper, the Australian Royal Commission, in the newspaper, and I'm like, what, Jehovah's Witnesses in the paper? I've never seen this before. And so it piqued my interest, so I was recovered. Essentially, I was recovered, and living essentially a normal life. And I realised when I got into support groups, maybe I can help people. So I didn't feel I needed help. I thought maybe I can help others. And I saw all the things I was struggling with. So I started referring people to lawyers. I started to write submissions to the government. So I've brought some today. I thought there might be some people in the audience that might be interested in some topics. I'll read them out shortly. I saw that somebody else in the community was writing really strong submissions and I wanted to be of help. And also they weren't covering the topics that were for women as much. Being a man, it was about the things that they saw, because men get trained in a different way to women in cults. So I wanted to give more of a female perspective. So some of my submissions are about human rights, coercive control, loneliness and social isolation, not that men don't suffer from this, but the extent and nature of poverty in Australia, forced child labour, and philanthropy, and how charity status helps them to make more money. So submissions like that. And as I did that, I also was part of meetup groups, and because I was interested in meeting a lot of activists across the world, so I would go to protests in other countries. So I've been to protests in Sweden, Denmark, London, Australia. I also meet with politicians and media in about 10 countries. And so a lot of it's about awareness. So, and my understanding is to break this abusive pattern, first we need awareness, then we need litigation, and then you get reform. And we are starting to see reform. It's really glacial, but I found I need to do all of those things to make a difference, because so many people are doing YouTube channels. It's mostly for our internal audience. We need the public to know. We need the general public to know about cults. So what I try and do is get it out to the public.
And how successful have you been? Because as you say, it is a painful, slow process trying to change governments' minds or raise awareness. And, you know, your paper gets sort of left in a dusty pile with all the other applications. And, you know, you just wonder what difference does it make? Can you describe some success? Yeah,
so one example is I funded a paper that resulted in a grand jury in Pennsylvania. So 16 people have been arrested as a result of that. Another example is with modern slavery. There's an organisation that actually does the statistics for the expected numbers of modern slaves. And so they listened to me and they said, we've changed the way that we think about how modern slavery happens, and we now, you know, understand that it can happen in cults. And so there's been other things as well, such as I did a philanthropy submission about the charity status. And so at the moment, the Australian government is considering to abolish small religious charity. So that will have an impact on the Jehovah's Witnesses. So yeah, there's lots of little things all the time. There's a lot of frustration, but because I'm not always doing the same thing, not the one thing, there's always something that's moving forward.
Yeah, awesome.
The Pennsylvania case is huge, by the way. Good work.
I didn't do the work, I just helped the funding and support.
What is the latest on that?
The latest is 16 people have been arrested. Yeah.
Amazing.
So the person who actually was behind that, Barbara Anderson, is a little old lady in Tennessee, but she was born in New York. And she actually wanted to submit a complaint, and only someone who's born in that state can sort of, you know, make that complaint. So she said, I want to write this complaint. So I funded somebody to help her write the report, and then I funded the lobbying to get to the US to actually provide the report, but also go into Parliament and make statements and go and meet the politicians and go and meet with other activists in other religions. So it's actually really exciting. I know it sounds boring to some people, but it's actually really exciting because it's going to make a difference for kids.
Essentially,
that's the plan.
How I understand it, that most states in the US have a time limit for sexual abuse victims to come forward. And if they don't come forward in that time limit, then the abuser could get off for the rest of their life and they never can be put on trial. And so they lifted that.
The statute of limitations.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, they're lifting it all across the US, and there's actually a heat map of the US, and you can see which statutes of limitations are being lifted. Yep, child something USA. I bet the US people here know what it's called, but anyway, there's a heat map on that, and it's great work that they're doing.
Amazing. Shane, you've been really involved in the Royal Commission here. How did you get involved in that?
Sort of fell into it, because once I learnt that JWorg had a problem with protecting perpetrators or alleged perpetrators, I then discovered that the congregation I was one of the elders in had a perpetrator. And I went, oh crap, I let my son go and stay there. And I went, oh, this will be interesting. I'm out of the JWs, my son is in the JWs, still in there, and I had to ring him and not let him know who it was. And I go, Ryan, has anybody ever touched you in any weird way? And he said no. And then a few other things came along, like the Network of Survivors here in New Zealand, which has worked very closely with the Commission, with writing submissions not only to the government, we've been involved in writing submissions to the UN over the years. And so from that, I'm thinking, okay, so I used to be an elder, I thought I knew their policies, I can't sit on my hands anymore. And so on the JW perspective, we were able to help not only the network, but also, and I know we weren't the only ones, because right around the world people would send the Commission all sorts of things. So the first thing we were able to do is like Phil Pennington from Radio New Zealand, your offsider, and he got on the radio here in New Zealand very quickly that the elders were encouraged to get rid of their personal notes. You know, this is evidence of the crimes that have been committed. And he got that on the media, and then led next step and next step and next step, and then we started making sure the Commission had everything we could get them to be able to, you know, like the lawyers. We sent Simon Mount a picture from one of their recent publications, maybe 10 years ago, and in there it's of a court scene. And we sent it to him. And basically it says in that court scene that they will appeal any unfavourable decision that went against the JWs. Well, they've lost 6 cases.
They have.
And they've continued to appeal. Now they can't appeal on the Royal Commission's findings. They've run out.
Yep, they went all the way to the Supreme Court and lost that case, yeah.
So that's where it started for me, and then we've just become part of that. Obviously the final report's out, but we will always try and help where we can to make sure people have the information they need, which is getting harder because Watchtower or Jehovah's Witnesses are changing their policies all over the place, and to follow that, it's just so hard.
And can I just add, and I'm interested in if this applies to other people in the audience, the Jehovah's Witnesses are no longer printing much information, it's all online. So when they change it, you've got no record that it's been changed. Does it happen in other cults? Are the Mormons doing that? Are the Exclusive Brethren doing that? I don't know, but Jehovah's Witnesses are doing that.
So the New Zealand government has actually was going to apologise to victims of state care and faith-based institutions next month and announce hopefully details of a redress scheme. I'm really keen to hear from you, Lara, about how the redress scheme has worked in Australia for the Jehovah's Witnesses and what potentially we can learn and apply here in New Zealand.
Yeah, I've got a note I'll access in just a second. But so we've got a national redress scheme, and it's comprised of, and it's for child sexual abuse, and it's comprised of 3 parts. So 1 is the compensation, 2 is some amount of money for counselling, and the 3rd thing is an apology. And so far, I'm not aware of any apologies that anyone's received from the Jehovah's Witnesses, even though the scheme has been in place for 6 years. It's a 10-year scheme. The maximum payout is $150,000, and people are on average getting about half of that. It is a sort of sliding scale with, this might be a bit confronting, but for example, if you were penetrated, then you're likely to get more compensation. We don't know how the New Zealand redress scheme will look. However, we've got research that we've done and made Parliament submissions and given testimony to the Australian Parliament on the redress scheme. So these are some of the things I told the Australian Parliament about the barriers for cult people. So I'll just quickly open this up and tell you a couple of those points. So we said that the reason why redress is difficult for Jehovah's Witness survivors is that, 1, there's a lack of statistics. So not many Jehovah's Witness survivors know whether other people have been successful. So they feel fearful. Am I going to be successful? Should I put my energy into doing this? Number 2, survivors are worried that the Watchtower, Jehovah's Witness head office, will find out that they've made an application for redress, and then they'll get disciplined. For example, disfellowshipped and shunned. That's the thing they're most scared of. Another example is, as I mentioned before, they've got a high incidence of poverty. So they've got to take time out from work or looking after the children, for example, to submit their redress scheme application, which can be quite traumatising. They also don't know which legal entities to nominate. So the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Australia is one legal entity. There's approximately 850 legal entities in Australia. So which one do you nominate? Because the Jehovah's Witnesses will use it against you. Recently in Canada, I don't know if you've heard about this, but there was a class action that failed because the lawyers didn't nominate the correct legal entity. So it's a real fear. So I won't go through all of them, but another thing is that the Department of Social Services that administers the redress scheme doesn't use cult language. So in our cults, there's certain words that we know, like people don't necessarily know what redress means. it means compensation. But that's not a word we use in the cult. And the other thing is, just picking out a random one, disinformation is provided to congregants regarding vicarious responsibility for the care of children. So the Jehovah's Witnesses, and this is why they lost in the Royal Commission trying to get out of it, they say we don't care for children, and that's not true. So some people actually believe that, they don't care for children, so therefore I can't make a claim against them. That's not the case. You can make a claim to the redress scheme if you're eligible.
Well, just to touch on, when you are trying to appeal and raise awareness to politicians or to community leaders, or even just the public, what kind of barriers do you face? Is it just the fact that they don't know much about the Jehovah's Witnesses?
People generally know the Jehovah's Witnesses as going door to door, selling magazines and having children with them, and they look really wholesome. They're basically wearing beige, smiling, friendly. These days they have a cart in the centre of town, and they seem approachable and they love bomb. So the government still sees them like that. What they don't see are these wolves in sheep clothing. And so part of what I have to do is explain that that's disinformation, which is the session we just went through before when the panel was talking about disinformation. The church will release deliberate disinformation. And I also have talked about in my submission about human rights, all the harms that they perpetrate. They don't know that. The government doesn't know that. They know a lot about, they might know about shunning, they might know about blood transfusions, not a lot have blood transfusions, but they won't know necessarily about modern slavery. And they won't necessarily know about the huge amount of domestic violence. Someone mentioned earlier there's a lot of domestic violence in another cult. So there's a lot of harms that people aren't aware of. They may not know that they're in poverty situations, they may not know that they don't have an education. There's so many barriers, there's about 13.
I can see you nodding your head, Shane.
So
I can see you nodding your head in agreement or disagreement.
Oh no, I totally agree. You talk to people and it's like, people don't understand unless you put it down to plain English or in a language that's not cult, then they just don't get it. But you can't flood them. Because if they've never been in a high control group situation, they won't understand. Like I was down at the 2x2s and they're rattling off all these things and I'm going, yep, J-Dubs, Mormons, Scientology, Glory of our Brethren. People need to be educated, and to find a way to do that, Lara's, she's done all these submissions and things. It's very hard to get to the right person or group of organisations to be able to start educating, like therapists. I've had many tell me, I went to the therapist, but I had to explain everything. And so in ACC, if they're categorised, and if they get the 6 free sessions, they might have to use 4 of those to explain to their therapist, this, and this, and this, and this. And then the therapist still doesn't fully comprehend. So it's an education thing. It's like Decult. It's the start of education, of communicating to ones where we need an influx of therapists. I truly believe, if 1,000 Jehovah's Witnesses left and they needed mental health, it ain't going to handle the New Zealand health system. So you imagine all the other ones, the Glory Vale, the 2x2s, and they go to the therapist, it's going to fail and crash because there's not enough trained individuals.
We put a number to it. Did the Pew research on how many Jehovah's Witnesses leave, and it was over 100,000 a year. Like the retention rate's the lowest in the country of any religion that they
2/3
studied.
leave, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like that amount of people are coming into the system that don't get help.
And so what help do they need?
So this is not pre-prepared, but I'm so glad you asked that.
It's a book for that.
I just remembered, I've got recommendations. So I wrote a submission on loneliness and social isolation, because that's really the core of it. All these cults are isolating us. And so I had 7 recommendations. I won't read them all, but for example, develop a training curriculum and material for primary schools to teach children about coercive control and human rights. Another one is conduct research into religious harm factors, including the prevalence of each factor and an understanding who's causing the greatest harm and why. Another one is should create a referral pathway. We don't have that for cult survivors, a referral pathway. That's something a lot of people in this room could help to do. Provide Are You in a Cult multimedia advertising with referrals to support. Are you in a cult? There's programs for gambling, there's programs for smoking, but cults are, I argue, just as damaging, if not more. Why don't we have Are You in a Cult TV advertising, for example? That type of thing.
I also like the theme that Decult has been advertising, just about upskilling. Like anyone here who's a professional already, just add another layer onto that, and that could help a lot.
Yeah, hopefully they'll go away and inform their colleagues and get the training and help people, for sure. Shane, what's your next, do you have a next project or campaign in mind?
Well, there's definitely a need to, like even here at the Decult, we've met a number of people that did not know there's a community of XJ-dubs out there. Somehow we need to find out, let them know, people know that there is groups. With regards to the network of survivors, we're trying to continue to do submissions because it's not just a J-dub problem. We've got to be able to, and it's a real battle. So if the minister's still here, and I don't know if he is, that stood up and said, we want to take note, here's an opportunity, Mr. MP, Kerr, was that his name?
Duncan,
yes. If he's in the room or somebody knows him, here's the opportunity to grab this. We've heard a couple of times, we need to set up in the human rights. We need to do this. We need to do that. Okay, fine. When are we going to do it? So there's lots of things that all these high control groups, these cult-like organisations can do to be able to support the ones coming out.
Shane, what keeps driving you to advocate for people, for former Jehovah's Witnesses in these issues?
There's a need. More and more stories keep coming forward. And you just listen. I know some of my clients, because I clean carpets, and you talked about time. Well, I'm cleaning carpets. I know how to clean a carpet. I can talk on the phone and they hear some interesting conversations. And they go, oh, what was wrong with that person? But I have to, when you do it because there's a need. So, yeah, I've been able to educate people, well, this is what actually happens in these high control groups. And they go, no. But it's true. And so, motivation, it's just wanting to help, to support, because they struggle. They really, really struggle. They think they're by themselves. And so I guess that's the motivation I've got. So, yeah.
And Lara, when you're doing all these submissions and talking to all these important people, like what keeps driving you to do this? And is there a personal toll to that?
Yeah, there definitely is a personal toll. I definitely relate to the ebb and flow. For example, the religion attacks me. They have cult apologists that have written articles about me in multiple languages. The
Badge of honor.
Badge of honor, yeah. It's a bit stressful, but I have nightmares still. And but what drives me is, just like I can see the audience in front of me today, I can see the children. I can see the next generation of children and the one after that suffering what we did if I don't keep going. So I can't stop because we have to stop it in our generation. Otherwise they're going to end up like us, and I don't want that to happen.
Thank you.
So I'm driven by the kids, yeah.
How do you deal with the fact that the Jehovah's Witness Church, the Watchtower, they often offer a very different version of the so-called truth to what you are saying? I've personally had this in my reporting, and obviously we just put the comments in the story and just let readers make up their own mind as to what they're saying. But it's a different situation when you're having to deal with it personally.
Yeah, so I write submissions about it. I often gather that information. So, for example, what can happen is I can say something to a journalist, not you, and they might get it wrong. They might misinterpret what I've said or actually quote the wrong numbers or write the wrong thing. We don't always get a chance to see the final copy. And either ex-Jehovah's Witnesses or Jehovah's Witnesses, or sometimes the Jehovah's Witnesses leaders pick up on that and will amplify it. They don't realise it's not what I said, or that's not the information that I provided that was reported. It's not quite right. Or it is exactly right what I said, and the Jehovah's Witnesses are trying to cover up. So you can't fight every battle, you have to pick your battles, but I will collect disinformation that the Jehovah's Witnesses distribute, and I'll put it in the next submission that's relevant. And, an example of that might be shunning. In one court in another country, they're arguing that it's their religious right to shun. But in Australia, they'll say, no, we don't shun. Look at their website and they'll say, we don't shun. But their material, if you look back at their material that was printed, it's quite clear that was what they did.
Talk to my family.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not communicating.
Exactly.
So we've got a few minutes left to wrap up. I just really want to give you each a few minutes to, explain what's your call for action here.
Oh,
Who's going to go
give me
first?
a second.
Okay.
Pass it on
Shane?
to Shane.
What's my call to action? There's a lot more that survivors of religion can be doing that you may not realise. So you can do podcasts, you can make a movie, you can set up a support group, you can do submissions, but you can also do petitions. You can also travel to see other people, say in a different cult, see what you've got in common, and speak to the local MP about that. You can also give testimony in Parliament. So what happens in our country, and I think it's the same in yours, is every 5 years, approximately, laws get reviewed. Is that right here in New Zealand as well?
It depends on the law.
Okay, depending on the law. Or a new law gets introduced. You have an opportunity to comment on it. So the legislation will actually be published, and you can go read that legislation, and they have legislation for dummies sort of versions. If you don't understand it in writing, because I know a lot of people have dyslexia, for example, you can actually speak to the people in the parliamentary committee and ask them, can you explain this to me? I want to give feedback. Or do you have a group of people that are actually going to be part of a working group for this legislation? And that happens approximately every 5 years. So I've done that in multiple countries. So if there's nothing happening in my country, I can help in New Zealand or I can help in England. So earlier this year, I actually made a submission to the Modern Slavery Act in the UK, and I helped other ex-Jehovah's Witnesses to do that too. So you can pick a topic that's really important to you. If it's poverty.
Anything to add?
I've got two things. Well, one is making a movie. If you want to make something, I'm happy to talk about it. I have another idea, and I want to work with professionals. In the case of my film, Witness Underground, I didn't have any professionals in the film, but maybe, so if you're interested in doing that, it's a great audience to bring in to tell a powerful story. But I've had this idea of going 6 years to make a movie. I could probably do it in 3. So it's a long time scale to affect change, and then people need to do the marketing. So it's multiple years. It's a long time scale. So I think doing a podcast, getting in radio shows, being a guest, if you have a great story or a cause, being a guest on other podcasts is the fastest way to reach a broad audience. If you think you want to make your own podcast, that's a huge task. I'm happy to bring anyone onto my show if you want. I have a show on YouTube. And I think that's a faster, in 1 hour we can get the story out in the world. And if somebody wants to make a film out of that someday, it's let's talk. And then another one that really was cool was there's this ex-Mormon that put together a beach party in Los Angeles called Interfaithless Beach Party. And so they invited basically this exact audience to the beach. And so all the Mormons were ex-Mormons were sober, all the ex-Jehovah's Witnesses were getting lit, and then all the ex-Jews were talking about food. It was great, and we all got to get to know each other, and I met an ex-Orthodox Jewish filmmaker, and we've become friends, and now we're working together. So this kind of thing can happen in not so much of a professional, serious setting. We can do it on the beach. Go get a beer.
Awesome idea. Anything to wrap up, Shane?
Yeah, we're talking about doing things. I would encourage people to do things. The first thing to do, look after yourself. Go and get some help from a therapist that you feel comfortable with. And then once you've worked out your little major things, because we're all going to have little things, then go and do something. It doesn't matter what you do. Early on they said this morning, we've got a mouth. We can use it, whether it's writing, whether it's whatever it is. Look after yourself first, then move on to other things to help the next generation, like Lara said.
Excellent advice, I think. Thank you so much. I think we've got some time now for some questions. If anyone has any questions, I think a roving mic will make its way to you.
Hi, I'm Caroline. One thing I've noticed in this, there's a theme here about getting help and getting therapy, and it has been in other groups. What I want to highlight to people is funding is a huge issue usually, and there is a funding stream. The Centrepoint community, when it shut down, all its money went into a trust, and one of the trust points that they give money towards is funding for therapy for people who've been in cults or people affected by cults. Okay, so that's a revenue source, not revenue, a funding source, and that's one of the biggest barriers to care. And obviously the second is the therapist to go to, and we're doing that, we're sorting that this week here with Gilly Jenkinson, and so many of you are actually therapists as well. Okay, so that's a do, we're doing that.
Thank you, that's super helpful.
The Secular Therapy Project I'm a big fan of, and Recovering from Religion, who's here, helped create that or sponsor that.
And they are here somewhere.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say a really big thank you to you all, but especially to you, Anusha, for the reporting that you're doing here in New Zealand. You told part of my story anonymously last year, so I'd like to connect with you at some point.
Yes.
I'm so grateful, and it was in the early stages of my coming away, and you've created a community for us and brought some of us together, and please keep it up.
Thank you so much.
I'm so glad you said that. We should have a trophy for Anusha.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Because she's probably in the top 3 reporters on Jehovah's Witnesses in the world.
Yep.
There was only ever before you, there was Trey Bundy and there was David Gambacorta, both in the US. So having you here has been incredible for this local community. Thanks.
Thank you. A bit embarrassing, but thank you to all the people who open up to me and trust me. Thank you.
She asked how you can see my film, Witness Underground. So it's very simple. I made a website, witnessunderground.com. It is a film about Jehovah's Witnesses escaping a cult using self-expression and music. And they were a music scene of hundreds of kids making bands for 17 years in the religion, and then getting out and making even more music that's more powerful without any limitations. And it's on witnessunderground.com, so you can see all the links to watch. It's on Apple, Amazon, Tubi, YouTube Movies and TV, and 10 other places. And every link is on there with a map of the planet with which country you can watch it in. Try to make it as simple as possible to get the whole thing out there. International premiere was last night, but it is available in New Zealand to watch. Spread the word.
What I found with going to the biggest screen, I go, I don't remember that. There were so many points that I got out of it after watching it a number of times.
I watched it on Tubi in Australia, so that works.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you. Just really quick, so I'm speaking from the perspective, I'm a mental health care nurse, and in recent probably 12 months, I've noticed a huge influx of young Jehovah's Witnesses coming in, and I identify it because on their healthcare plan they've got no blood. And I'm just wondering, I can see the mental trauma that's not, while young people are going through that in general, it just seems a bit more profound and it seems chronic. And I just want to know, I get a finite period of time with young people, especially in acute mental health care, which is what I do. What can we do? Because my teammates and even my unit manager, we're not quite sure how we could help without causing harm, which is quite a thing. And then, well, of course, practicing holistic and patient-centered care, that you don't want to overstep the boundaries. I'm here just to try and develop myself as a nurse, and I'm just scared I'm going to say something wrong or maybe, highlight something that could cause more trauma. And obviously it's relative to the person. So
Probably not us to answer because we're not medical health professionals, but there is a great resource called JW Support
for
for young people.
Okay.
But Is there anyone in the room that's provided? Probably Luke would be a good person to ask that question.
I asked him. Yeah. Yeah, it's just there's no like formal like it's hard to find formal information. So
Yeah.
That site for the support is on the JW Facts. You'll find a little jwfacts.com. You'll find a little thing with support. Click on that and it will take you to those pages.
thank you.
I'm just wondering, did you ever get any feedback from the Watchtower as to your film yet?
I really thought that was going to like make it blow up. It's getting litigated. So I kind of hoped on some level that would happen. Like you
Sorry.
made it. Yeah, you got it. I was doing the wrong avenue. So no, I've like heard absolutely nothing. I've heard from not one single active witness that they've actually watched it. The only thing that's been happening that's like super interesting to me is I never watched a movie and was like, wow, I like that movie. I need to find the person who made that and write them a letter about how it made me feel. And I'm getting that. That's cool. I'd prefer a review on Rotten Tomatoes. But it's really heartwarming and really cool that like someone's like, this really hit me so much that I had to go find out who made it. I'm gonna write them a letter. So it's really awesome. And so it's hitting a note emotionally.
It's also rewarding, right, guys?
Yeah.
So even though it is hard, and yes, we do cry sometimes, there's a huge reward when you know someone wrote to you and you wrote back and it made their day.
Yeah.
Or someone really needs to have a coffee and you're willing to go and do that. Or someone benefited from something you wrote 3 years ago and now it's changed the law. There's a huge amount of reward.
Yeah.
I think we had one more question. Is it Ulrika?
Please watch the film, Witness Underground. It's really wonderful. And there was talk about how to reach politicians. Politicians are people, and people are moved by stories more than by anything else. So in my experience, it's good when someone is willing to tell a story, their own story. That might be in a media, give an interview.
Exactly.
So films, they are very impressive. And these, sometimes it could be just one person who is at the right time. He is writing a letter to politicians, maybe, or asking for an audience and tell about the story. So it's really a small group of people, and singular people can make quite an impact. And I have one question for you. We always think about how can we reach children. This is a government problem. How can we get access to children in closed groups, in high control groups? Is there anything that, from your own perspective, what would help you if a government have whatever interventions? Can you think of anything?
There are some interventions that could be done, but they haven't been done. So one intervention could be a legislative requirement to put support on the JWorg website. So that's the official Jehovah's Witness website. On cigarette packages in Australia, we have warnings. There's no warnings on the churches.
Oh, wow.
There's no warnings on their websites. Why couldn't that be legislated? I know in Canada when the class action was happening, they were looking at considering options like that, of actually mandating having training or support available on their website, because a lot of their kingdom halls or churches are closing down, so there's no point in putting a sign out the front. But there should be warnings about these.
Like at the end of a medicine commercial, they have to say like this can cause nausea or death. Like this religion might cause nausea or death.
Yeah. So
But
that's
that would
one
not
way.
reach the children or the youth in the group. How? Because this is more like someone who is interested in a group. First generation.
So-
how do I get to second generation?
Maybe Mickey has the answer with
TikTok.
with TikTok and other social media forms. Social media advertising would be a way. Another way is one of my suggestions in the submission was to have human rights training. We are not taught about human rights. For example, we know about freedom of religion, but we don't know about freedom from religion. So we should be allowed to leave And therefore, I suggest that children are taught human rights, including that they should have freedom from religion.
Once again, Anisha, thank you very much for the work you have done and continue to do to educate the country of New Zealand, and it goes around the world, as to the problems within these high control groups. Because, yeah, you focus on the JWs, but every other group has similar things, just different titles for those things. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much to our fantastic panel of Scott, Lara, Shane, and by video, Mickey. And especially it's really great, as the young people say, to see Anusha Bradley getting her flowers today, and just great recognition.